Hello, and welcome to ConTinual, the never-ending convention. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and I will be your host this evening for The Games Afoot, a panel about Sherlockian mystery. With me tonight are 5 wonderful writers in Holmesian universes: Gini Koch, Sherry Thomas, Alexandra Christian, Ann Wicker, and John French. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start up with some introductions because as wonderful as all of your writings are, I know that not everybody knows what everyone else is writing. So I'm going to start with you, Gini. Tell the world who you are and what you write in a Holmesian universe.
Okay, I am Gini Koch. Outside of a Holmesian universe, I'm best known for writing the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Daw Books, which is science fiction, but I write under 7 pen names and in every genre. And in the mystery genre, I write Sherlockian mysteries for Abaddon Books. And I know you're going to ask us about them later. So basically, I write anything and everything, but Holmes is my first love.
Okay, cool. John?
I'm John L. French, and 2 years ago, I retired from the Baltimore City Police Department Crime Lab. I spent 40 years as a crime scene investigator, which basically gives me and Sherlock Holmes something in common. I've written paranormal mysteries with Bianca Jones. I've written crime collections. First one is Past Sins. Another supernatural mystery is The Magic of Simon Tombs. As far as Sherlock Holmes is concerned, I have a novel at Padwolf Publishing that will be put out eventually. But other than that, I have written a couple of Sherlock Holmes short stories.
Okay, great. Ann?
Hi, I'm Ann Wicker, and I am a former journalist and currently a writer and editor. I've worked with over 30 different authors on all kinds of different books, mysteries, books about business, all that sort of thing. I'm mostly interested in memoir, and I helped Ann Moses of Tiger Beat magazine fame write her memoir about her time at Tiger Beat in the 60s and 70s.
I'm going to have to look that one up.
Oh, me too.
And so I am more of a Sherlock Holmes fan and minor collector of the Sherlock Holmes books, and I have reviewed tons of pastiches and have really enjoyed that aspect of my fandom of Sherlock Holmes. So I'm not as much of a writer in the Holmesian universe as the rest of you, but I'm loving this because I'm discovering things for myself tonight. So anyway, I would aspire to write a good Holmesian pastiche, and one of these days I will. So anyway, thank you for having me tonight.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Alexandra?
Hi, I'm Alexandra Christian. I write primarily paranormal and contemporary romance, but I have kind of a moonlighting situation with Sherlock Holmes. My father was a huge Sherlock Holmes fan and scholar, and so it's been kind of my family culture since I was a child. One of my favorite movies is Young Sherlock Holmes. I love that story, and I love that kind of Sherlock mystery as well. Really fast-paced, really action-packed, and I like a little bit of supernatural with mine as well. I started publishing Sherlock Holmes not as a writer, but as an editor. I edited a book of Sherlock Holmes paranormal short stories. And it was a bunch of different authors who the only rule that they had was that they had to be paranormal, and they couldn't do any Scooby-Doo moments. It all had to have a paranormal explanation. I did 2 books of those, and I only wrote 1 story for the second book. But then I also write a series for Falstaff books that's actually about Dr. Watson, and they are paranormal horror novellas that follow what Watson is doing in the 3 years that Holmes is supposedly dead. And unfortunately, Holmes is a ghost that bothers Watson through all the books. So that's me.
Okay. And Sherry?
I started out in romance. I wrote 9 historical romances. I also have written some books for the young adult market, including this one fantasy series and also an adaptation of the original Ballad of Mulan in the English language. And for the Sherlock Holmes side of things, my only entries are my Lady Sherlock series, which asks the question, what if the fictional character of Sherlock Holmes, what if his exploits were actually inspired by the lives and deeds of, not lives, how many can she have, by the deeds of a real life woman named Charlotte Holmes, who, you know, took up detecting in Victorian England in the same era.
Mm-hmm. What, I mean, I had read your historical romances, and they are very detailed and very lush in terms of their period authenticity and detail. What made you decide to invent and move into a Holmesian universe? What was the inspiration for Charlotte?
What was the inspiration for Charlotte? I first wanted to write a Sherlock Holmes pastiche when I first read The Beekeeper's Apprentice by Laurie R. King. And I thought that was so original and so well done. I had never read anything before like it. But at the time, I had barely started my romance career, and I had certainly never written a mystery. So that was just a thought until I watched the BBC Sherlock. Mm-hmm. And I love how they adapted it to the 21st century with making use of the more recent war in Afghanistan for Dr. Watson's background. And I thought, okay, they already made Sherlock a modern person very well. And over at CBS, I believe they were airing Elementary, and Elementary has a female Watson. And then I thought, well, the only thing that's left to do is to make Sherlock the Holy Grail, to make Sherlock himself a woman this time around. Originally, I wanted to do it for the YA market. And so I turned to my YA editor and said, hey, how about it? And she immediately said, mysteries don't sell well in YA. And guess what book came out like almost the exact same time as my Lady Sherlock, but which gave my friend, not me, but which gave my friend, you know, she almost had a stroke when she heard about a study in Charlotte. And which was YA and which did very well, I believe. So since my YA editor said no, I turned around to my romance editor and say, hey, you guys, how about you? And they actually said yes, because I didn't do any more historical romance. I had run out of ideas, and I said, I have this thing. It's kind of, you know, there will be a romance in it, and it's the same time period that I've always done, so I'm familiar with it. It's the 80s and 1880s and 1890s, so I'm familiar with the period. How about it? They said yes, so that was how it happened.
Oh, cool. Very cool. And the books are wonderful, I can attest. And I have also read A Study in Charlotte. Very different. It's contemporary.
Right.
Yes.
Contemporary, that's correct. Yeah.
Anyway, Alexandra, what about you? What finally said, I have got to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard to write in a Holmesian universe?
I'm so ashamed to admit this. Okay. So y'all heard it here first. I'm so ashamed to admit this. My actual first dipping my toes in the waters of Sherlock was writing BBC Sherlock fan fiction. I'm sorry it happened.
Don't be sorry. We're all writing fan fiction here.
Honestly.
All Sherlock Holmes
Well,
stories are fan fiction.
our fan fiction,
Yeah,
exactly.
yes,
We're
Yeah.
all fan fiction here.
Well, like I said, I've always been interested in Sherlock Holmes and in those kinds of stories, even though I'm not a person who reads a lot of mystery, which is weird because all the women in my family are huge mystery fans. But anyhow, so I had always been interested in that character. And then my sister said, "Oh, you've got to see it." When the BBC Sherlock came out, she was like, "Oh my God, you have got to see this show. It is so amazing. You will absolutely love it. It's Sherlock Holmes. And the guy who plays Sherlock Holmes is hot in the way you like guys to be hot." And I was like, okay, I'm not sure whether that was a compliment or not for me or for Benedict Cumberbatch, but so I watched it and I was completely obsessed with it. And so I started, reading some fan fiction. I'm kind of ashamed to say, and some of it was really good, but a lot of it was really bad, and a lot of it was nothing but very out of character sexual situations. And I was like, I can totally make some in character sexual situations for these people. So that's what I started out doing, is just kind of doing fan fictions of Sherlock as a person, and the mysteries that he's solving were part of the story, but they weren't like the main part of the story. So of course, that kind of got me into the whole fandom thing, and I did an essay about like villains for the Baker Street Babes. They did a collection of essays. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then at the time, my sister and I were doing some self-publishing stuff as Little Red Hen Romance. And we were doing like little stories that we could sell for 99 cents. And we had new ones every couple of weeks. Well, I was completely stumped for an idea one month. And so she said, "Well, why don't you just do a Sherlock Holmes thing?" And I was like, "A Sherlock Holmes romance? Are you kidding?" And she was like, "Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Sure, you can do it." So I did, and that became Chasing the Dragon, which is a novella that now Falstaff Books has. And it kind of goes with the Watson books, but kind of doesn't. It's kind of its own thing. But yeah, so that's kind of me. I think maybe I just wanted to get Sherlock laid. I don't know.
And Ginny, what prompted you? I mean, you have so many universes, truly, and so many people in your head. What prompted you to take on a Holmesian universe?
I am a gigantic Holmes fan. I read the complete Sherlock Holmes at 7, and for most of my life after that, I read it cover to cover every year or every other year after that. So I used to tell myself I was a Holmes purist. And then I met my editor at Abaddon, David Thomas Moore, at a Worldcon. And we were talking about it. And I said, I used to think I was a purist, but I realized I'm not. He goes, "Me too," right? And he's British. So he said that in a really adorable British accent. And so we're comparing all this stuff. And I'm like, and I like the Robert Downey Jr. movies. I'm like, I'm like, she's like, "Me too." He goes, "And I'm doing an anthology." And I'm like, "Oh, I need to be edited." He goes, "You do," which is how I started writing my version of Sherlock. It's set in present day Los Angeles. My Sherlock is a woman, and Watson is a man. He is, conveniently back from Afghanistan, because that is the convenient war for anything set in contemporary days. And it's fun because it is a pastiche. It is something that I'm not writing. I would be very willing to write real Holmes and real Watson stories, but I like doing this. And we had to, the call was you had to create your own Sherlock situation. And David liked mine and 2 others so well that we also got to write novellas. So my first one is All the Single Ladies, and the second one is A Study in Starlets. And my take on Sherlock, there's something very obsessive about the character. I don't see Sherlock as, I don't actually like the BBC version at all. I don't think they get what Doyle was writing. I don't think they get the essence of Holmes. He is not a sociopath, and he actually cares very deeply about people. He's not huggy feely, but he cares, and he cares about justice, and he cares about justice more than he cares about the law, which I think is a very important distinction. And I don't like that take. So I wanted to do something, and his obsession in the books is with cocaine. Okay, that's what he's using in the downtimes. And I don't necessarily view him as a drug addict, though I loved what they did with Elementary. I love Johnny Lee Miller as Holmes, and I love Lucy. Well, Lucy Liu is probably my favorite actress, so I love her in anything, and I loved her as Watson. But I didn't want to do that, so I made my Holmes. She is addicted to reality TV, because she thinks she can learn and does learn a lot about that. So all the crimes are related to Hollywood and reality television that are going on there. And then, of course, I do have to give the shout out to what I do think is the best screen representation of Holmes. I still think is Jeremy Brett from the 80s series. But I honestly think the best Watson is Jude Law from the Robert Downey Jr. movies, because that's how I see Watson when I read the books. So.
As
you
a
and
man
my
of action.
husband would be all about, y'all would be able to talk, because he loves Sherlock. He thinks Jeremy Brett is the only Sherlock Holmes.
I'm with him. He's really the best. I mean, everyone else just aspires to touch the hem of his garment. But I liked a lot of the others, and I like.
Now that was my
so
dad.
Was Jeremy Brett.
That was my dad. My dad was. There is no visual representation of Holmes except Basil Rathbone.
Yeah. Yes, the most obnoxious man in all of Hollywood. The only person who could walk on stage and say, "How about some tennis?" and have everyone go, "Oh, he's obnoxious." And he was a nice man too, apparently. But some people are not who they are on screen. Okay, John, how did you wind up writing in a Holmesian universe?
Well, my first references to Holmes in fiction were sort of side references. In my Matthew Grace collection, Past Sins, Grace, as a crime scene investigator, gets involved in a case where the solution is essentially stolen from the problem of Thor Bridge. I wrote a zombie story in which someone's mentioned that he entered a house and was never seen again, which is the James Phillimore story. And somehow I got involved in writing a science fiction mystery which featured a airlock problem. And since he went into the airlock and was never seen again, the ship was called the SS Phillimore. So I hadn't really written any Sherlock Holmes stories until I was asked to write one for a collection called The Great Detective. Actually, The Great Detective, His Further Adventures. Mm-hmm. And I'd never written one. And so I'm thinking, well, I'm a crime scene investigator. If I can do it, Holmes can do it. Mm-hmm. So I thought back. I don't usually use real cases, but I thought back to a case where I wound up standing in this room doing blood stain pattern analysis, trying to figure out who got hit when. And so I figured that was a good thing for Holmes to do. In fact, I have him writing a monograph on blood stain pattern analysis. And so he's standing in the doorway on the first floor of the Diogenes Club doing blood stain pattern analysis, and I just let it flow from there. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, I was asked by a publishing company that will remain nameless if I would do a Sherlock Holmes meets somebody, another famous detective, and they collaborate. Being of a perverse nature, I had him team up with Raffles, who's a famous thief, but not necessarily a detective. And that story wasn't published right away. It was eventually published in a smaller magazine. But and in talking to Patrick Thomas from Pad Wolf Publishing, I'm now doing a kind of a supernatural Sherlock Holmes mystery set in Eastern Europe, or Holmes mystery. I won't say Sherlock, but set in Eastern Europe. And that's it for my fictional Holmes adventures.
Well, and since you aren't really doing that much writing of your own in the Holmesian universe yet, one of the things that intrigues me as I'm going around the room is some folks are completely in a real world Holmesian thing, well, a real fictional world where logic and cause and effect play out as they do in the present day or in history as we know it. Whereas some other folks are taking kind of the irregulars side of things, that new show on Netflix, where there is a supernatural or speculative fiction element to it. Do you have any thoughts on that and why you think one is better than the other?
I think I'm going to be really diplomatic, but I think they both have a place. And I'm going with that because I think anything that brings the whole Holmes spirit to storytelling and to explaining that world is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that, like kind of like Jenny, I started reading them. I did a book report when I was in the 5th grade on Sherlock Holmes, and and then when I was in college, I did an independent study on Sherlock Holmes. But I think that they all have merit, and I always say, classic Holmes in the films or in TV, Jeremy Brett, hands down. Even though I do kind of love Basil Rathbone, Jeremy Brett is the classic Holmes. Contemporary Holmes, I'm a Benedict fan. I just love that take on it. And I liked Elementary, but it was something about Johnny Miller just didn't quite do it for me. Although I thought that there were some really great elements. Having Moriarty be a woman in that take was a good flip. But to me, I think that adding a little bit of supernatural in there is not a bad thing, because it's not a bad thing to add the to flip Holmes as a woman, Watson as a woman, whatever. I just think that it's wonderful that draws people in to rediscover the canon stories as well.
So basically, any entry drug is a good one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
John, are you? I'm assuming that the Sherlock Holmes Raffles thing was real, quote, real world.
Yes, it was.
But some of the others are not. Obviously, airlock, a closed airlock.
And that was just my shout out to Holmes was naming the ship the Fillmore.
Mm-hmm.
And but let me throw another candidate into the favorite Holmes debate. I like Ian Richardson. Holmes as in The Sign of Four and in Hound of the Baskervilles. I just felt he's had a completely different take on Holmes. Holmes was the smartest guy in the room, and he knew it, but he seemed to be having fun with it.
Was that on British TV or?
You can get both of them on, if you have Amazon Prime, you can get both of them there. Mm-hmm. Okay, but both Murder at the Diogenes Club and A Pardonable Offense are set in traditional Holmes's the traditional Holmes Victorian era. Neither one are narrated by Watson, but in fact the one with Raffles is actually narrated by Raffles. I read two 2 volumes of Raffles stories in order to get into
Right.
Raffles' mind. And I do say some slanderous
We lost
things
you.
about my pops.
There he is. Okay.
And so, so that's, and then the novel I've written for Padwolf is set, let's just say, in Victorian times, but in an alternate timeline.
Alternate timeline. Okay, cool. Sherry, Lady Charlotte is definitely real world. But do you ever feel the desire to throw some supernatural elements in there, or do you want to keep those elements separate from her world because her world is so intense and complicated as it is?
I don't have any plans to throw supernatural elements into the Lady Sherlock series because it is a reality-based series. But I do want to say that I have nothing against the mixing of Sherlock Holmes and the supernatural. I think I read this gigantic anthology of all the famous writers' takes on the on Sherlock Holmes, and I think my favorite one out of the whole bunch was done by Neil Gaiman. Certainly that was the one I remember best afterwards, basically about how Sherlock Holmes found the elixir immortality or something of the sort. And I just thought that was so well done. And it was very in character, and it was the best of the bunch. So I have nothing against. It's just that when your series is already you're already 6 books into the series, it's probably not the time to suddenly bring in a couple of vampires.
No. I was just thinking some of those characters, though, would be very restless ghosts. That was my thought on it. But yeah, no, I didn't think you were, but I thought I'd ask because, hey, we might get a scoop.
Another point is that, Doyle was very interested in the supernatural. And I don't know if you have any questions about, if you were going to ask us any questions about that, but, his association with Houdini is famous. And Houdini, the guy who debunks the supernatural, and Doyle who believed.
They made a TV show about it.
And it was so good.
I was wondering if anybody remembered that show but me.
I loved it.
Oh,
I only got
loved it.
1 season. I was so bummed. I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, well, every time I think of Doyle and the supernatural, as opposed to Sherlockian pastiches, I always think of how he was taken in by the fairy photos.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
He wanted to believe. He desperately wanted to believe. But I think it's interesting because he didn't write that in Holmes. There's really never a supernatural element in any of the stories.
No ghosts
always
need a pie.
Explained. Right. It's always explained. Even if someone is trying to make you think it's supernatural, he figures out how it isn't. But then, when I grew up, he and Watson did guest star on Scooby-Doo, so paranormal was always, if you've gone on Scooby-Doo, as far as I'm concerned, that means you can accept that paranormal could be happening, even though it's probably a man in a mask.
Yeah. When you did your, I haven't read your Sherlockian stuff. I know, I'm bad. I'm a bad human. But basically, I take it yours is all real world as well.
Yeah, I have a paranormal mystery solving series, Necropolis Enforcement Files. So I already have a female werewolf detective out solving crimes. So I didn't need to do that for Holmes. I enjoy grounding it in reality and in present day. It's harder in a lot of ways. Because you have to make sure that your clues work. You can't fling in, oh, that's a ghoul, that they can do that, right? You have to actually make it work. So it's a little bit harder, but I just like it because it's also sending up a lot of Hollywood, a lot of things that go on in there and what people will do in order to be successful. And so I enjoy grounding them in present day and or in the reality, I guess I would say.
Okay, Alexandra, what made you decide to go in the supernatural direction?
Oh my God, because Hound of the Baskervilles was the biggest disappointment of my childhood. I mean, I read it when I was like, I think I did a book report on it. I think somebody else did a book report in the 5th grade. I think I did a book report in like 5th or 6th grade, and I read Hound of the Baskervilles. My older sister was really into, she did a lot of community theater at the time, and they had just done a performance of Hound of the Baskervilles, and I had gone to see it or whatever. And they told me that I needed to read the book. And so I'm reading the book, and of course, the book is way more, than any play could possibly be. So I got all into the book and everything, and it gets to the end, and it's a total Scooby-Doo moment where it's not a ghost at all, and I was so disappointed. And it's like I remember that for my whole life, But even in like, if anybody is a fan of the Young Sherlock Holmes movie, which is a Chris Columbus movie, is lesser known. If you have not seen it, you totally need to see it. But Chris Columbus is directed, Steven Spielberg was involved.
Mhm.
And the whole time in the movie, you think that you're thinking that it's supernatural, and it kind of is in a way, but it kind of isn't. It's kind of supernatural in the way that voodoo is supernatural, So it's kind of one of those that has one foot in reality and one foot in paranormal. And I love that dynamic. So when I wrote my first novella, it was going to be just a straight Holmesian mystery. It was just going to have a romantic thread in it, and it didn't have anything paranormal at all. Well, right after that, I got involved with doing the Shadow Council Archives books with John Hartness with Falstaff Books. And of course, the Shadow Council Archives ties into his Quincy Harper series, which is very much an urban fantasy, paranormal sort of adventure stuff. And so I knew that had to be paranormal. Well, I liked my character, my female character in Chasing the Dragon so much that I couldn't help it. She had to be, a little side character in there that you just kind of see every now and then. So she kind of, we're kind of got one foot in each world, in my reality, I guess.
Well, we're all creating our own realities when we write, so it's all valid ultimately. Just curious about how people approach it. In any Sherlockian universe, you have two characters who show up in one form or another, Watson and usually Moriarty, or the ultimate antagonist, however the antagonist is described. When you all set about to create your companion and your antagonist, what were the influences you drew on to get? Alexandra, what about you?
Well, I don't know. I guess I was never of course we all love Moriarty because he's like the quintessential Holmesian villain. I really like that there is an evil character who is kind of the opposite of Holmes. He matches him in every way. He's kind of like what would happen if Holmes was a bad guy instead of a good guy. And I think that's even said in, I think Watson even makes that observation in one of those stories, and I can't remember which one. But talking about what a great villain Holmes would be if he decided to turn to the dark side. So I get, and as for Watson, as far as influencing, I kind of have to go with the Jude Law thing. I think that my Watson is more of a Jude Law-ish sort of, he's kind of Jude Law with a little bit of Martin Freeman's goofiness, because I like that. I like the funny parts of Watson, but I don't like the way that the Rathbone Holmes portrayed Watson as being an idiot.
Yeah,
I
Nigel
hate that.
Bruce is just, yeah,
He's just horrible. And the thing is, I think he kind of like, I think he really did a detriment to Watson as a character, because a lot of people just assume that Watson is a bumbling idiot that's just kind of following Holmes around. Well, the point of Watson is he's just as smart as Sherlock. He's just smart in a different way. And so that's the way I always kind of see that. And then, you know, and Watson also, you know, the way I see Watson, my influence on Watson is that he's maybe not as, he's not as in his head, he's way more physical. And that's his army background. That's his, you know, he's been in war, he's been traumatized by the war. So he's got a lot of the same issues that Holmes does. He just deals with them in a different way. And I really wanted to bring that out in my, you know, companion and my Watson. So I guess that answers your question.
Hey, there are no wrong answers. Sherry, you have a rather more complicated scenario when you're trying to deal with, you know, Watson, Holmes, and et cetera, because your Holmes really is hidden in a room. The quote Sherlock as opposed to Charlotte. How did you, you know, how do you address the whole Watson issue, or is there a Watson? And how do you address, and I know that your take on Moriarty is very different than the standard single villain, single thing. So could you talk a little bit about those, who fulfills those roles in the Lady Sherlock series?
In the Lady Sherlock series, my Watson is Mrs. Watson. So I remember Dr. Watson in the original books talk about how he was wounded by a Giselle bullet in the battle of this and that in Afghanistan. So mine was that, no, he was actually killed by the Giselle bullet. And it is his widow who befriended Sherlock Holmes. And the decision was made on a very practical front at the very beginning, because if Holmes and Watson were going to live together, this was 19th century England, and Watson being a man, when Sherlock is a woman, would present like plot points I didn't necessarily want. And I also wanted Watson as a woman, not only as a woman, but as an older woman. She's in her early 50s, as opposed to Sherlock Holmes, who's around 25 when the story began, because my Sherlock Holmes background was that she was a genteelly raised young woman who never quite fitted into her own world, but she did everything she was supposed to do. She was, you know, in London every season to look for a husband and all this and all that. So she may have the brains, but she didn't necessarily have the life experience. So I wanted to match her up with the older woman who has been through everything, and Mrs. Watson has been through a lot, to kind of give her a little bit that mentorship, and so that she is not someone who's just there going, how did you do that? That she actually has something to teach, not just Sherlock Holmes, but other young women who come into her orbit. And as for Moriarty, I very much took a look at BBC Sherlock. Like some of you, I love BBC Sherlock, but I really only loved it the first season and first 2 seasons. I think the show went on a nosedive fairly soon thereafter. There's still one good episode in season 3, I think, but I think by the time season 4 and 5 came around, I was like, not only is Sherlock Holmes totally unimproved from first season, like his shtick is wearing thin, but even Watson I don't like anymore. So my take on that, the lesson I took away from that, not only was that, you know, Sherlock and Watson must grow, but also that you should not get rid of Moriarty too early.
Mhm.
I had that
So,
exact same thought. I'm so glad you said that. I had that exact
yeah,
same
you
thought.
should not get rid of
Yeah.
Moriarty too early, because your arch enemy should not. Seriously, I have no idea why
Yeah.
he threw himself off a building at the end of season 2. Sorry if this spoils it for anybody. I have
Yeah.
no
Spoiler alert.
idea. I was like, is this person actually insane? Like, not insane as a as ableist language, but is he actually clinically
Yeah.
insane? So in my book, Moriarty has always been there in the background, but it isn't until book 6 that he actually comes forward into the light and steps onto the page himself and speaks and acts and so on. So I think, I don't think it's necessary for just any Sherlock Holmes to have a Moriarty, but I think in a long-running series, if you're going to do like, if you're going to do like a contemporary series, means like if your series is going to be like peak TV and have an overarching storyline instead of just the episodic storyline, then it is very helpful to have an arch enemy. Otherwise, if you're writing short stories, if you're writing standalones, then please yourself. You don't necessarily need an arch enemy for that.
What are your thoughts on that, Anne?
Well, I like having, I really always thought that having Holmes be challenged by somebody who is as smart as he was is a good way to expand the character's reach in a way. And it also, Moriarty to me, it gave him something to work against. He's always complaining, at various times he complains about, being bored, and then he's into the cocaine, and then he's whatever. And I think knowing that, Moriarty is out there spinning his web, as he puts it at some point, that gives him something to work against in a real way in the canon stories. And I really think that you're right about that. In the Cumberbatch series, they ditched Moriarty way too soon. I didn't care especially for the Moriarty in the Robert Downey movies, but he was a good foil for Holmes. And then Watson, to me, I have to go completely with Alexandra about that. Those Rathbone movies just did such a disservice to get that character, just totally. And having somebody like Lucy Liu, Jude Law, portray a Watson that is so strong and so good at building this relationship with Holmes. I mean, and Martin Freeman, I think he and Cumberbatch had real chemistry, at least in the first couple of seasons. And then Freeman got a little goofier, but I really think that having a sidekick and an arch enemy, that's the trope of almost, and I mean, and they set the standard for nearly every mystery story since then.
Okay, great. Ginny, how do you handle the whole Watson Moriarty thing?
Well,
Or do you?
I kind of do it, kind of don't. I am not actually a Moriarty fan, though I really do love what they did in Elementary. I'm with everybody on why would he jump off the roof in the BBC series. Because I've always known why Moriarty exists. He exists so Doyle could kill off the character that he felt was consuming his life. So to me, of all the characters out there that that Doyle created, Moriarty is the most paper thin. He's there as an excuse so I can end this. Please God, I write other things. And then for the rest of the stuff, he has to have an influence, right? Because he's dead, but we have to have seen how he was around, right? So I felt like from a writing standpoint, Moriarty is very, very thin. I think everyone else has turned Moriarty into something more than Doyle did. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But I don't think Moriarty, Sebastian Moran is more interesting than Moriarty. Okay. And he's in about as many stories. So to me, if you're going to use Moriarty, you're using it exactly why Anne and Sherry were saying. You have that evil overarching villain. And it's so accepted now that I feel like you almost can't not have it there. So in what I'm writing, because it's a series of shorts and novellas, Sherlock doesn't really talk about why she's left London and why she's left New York. And at the end of A Study in Starlets, however, the character that I'm actually going to talk about next basically makes a comment to Sherlock saying, "Oh, James knew you'd figure it out." And it just completely changes her attitude. And John's like, "What's going on?" She's like, "I'll tell you later." But that character is Irene Adler. And I realize Irene is only in one story too, but she's very significant to Holmes simply because of how he looks at her as the woman, right? And what I did in mine is that, of course, because it's a gender reversal, and Sherlock is just not interested in anything. Watson is who falls for Irene Adler, and Sherlock's being very snide. And he's like, "Just stop calling her that." She's like, "Oh, fine. Then I'll call her the woman, and she will be the woman forevermore." And a woman saying the woman is a very different thing from man saying the woman. So I have her as much more of an antagonist than a foil. She's not a real love interest for either. She was for Watson, and she's already broken his heart by the first book, and she's still around. So to me, I think there's this wealth of characters he created, most of them like Lestrade, all the various policemen he runs into, that you really have a wide range of characters that you can pick out and use, because he really drew them very, very well. And I think we all use Moriarty because film uses Moriarty. TV uses Moriarty because it gives that overarching villain that everybody likes. Right here, he's ready-made, and you can make him whatever you want because he's so paper thin on paper that he's barely two-dimensional, and so you can do whatever you want. So it's actually a fun character to write. I'm sure it's a fun character to act, because you can make that your own in more ways than you can make Watson and Holmes your own, because there's anything in the world to work with. And one thing I don't want to forget, a movie and a series that does a really good job, the Basil of Baker Street series and The Great Mouse Detective. Okay, they're awesome. And The Great Mouse Detective was one of my daughter's favorite movies, so I have every line memorized. But that is just such a good pastiche, even though they do make Watson Nigel Bruce-ish, but he's not stupid. He's just fat. But I just have to give the shout out to Basil of Baker Street for doing a really good job for the kids, to get kids hooked right into Holmes right away. So.
Okay. John, you seem to have a lot of different Watsons. Do you have a Moriarty?
Moriarty doesn't appear in either of my short stories, but Moriarty in some form or the other will appear in the novel. Can't say too much about what goes on in the novel, but yeah, there's definitely Moriarty. Moriarty was essentially a gang boss. And like Gini said, the sole reason for his existence is to give Holmes a worthy opponent so that Holmes dies for a good cause. You
Mhm.
know, if, you know, Holmes says, if destroying you is cost me my life, I'll pay the price. And then, of course, he had to bring him back. And if you think back to the final problem, Moriarty never actually appears. We hear from him about Holmes. And at the end, it's, you know, Watson comes to some logical but erroneous conclusions about Moriarty, but the actual Moriarty never shows up. Watson never sees him.
Mhm.
You know, for all we know, it's what happened in the 7% solution. Holmes went a little crazy and blamed his mathematics teacher.
And I love
Uh,
that movie.
And so as far as Watson, I only wrote, well, put it this way, Watson appears in the novel in some form or the other, but there's of my two stories, Watson only appears in one.
Yeah, I was
And
thinking Raffles sort of takes that role in
right,
one.
Watson only appears in one, and he's a doctor. That's what his role is. Holmes would not hang with a stupid, would not
Exactly.
work with a stupid person. And he would not work for somebody just because he likes them. He associates with Watson because Watson has knowledge he does not. That is medical knowledge. Plus, Watson is smart enough to appreciate Holmes's deductions. And as you know, Holmes says every once in a while, "You're coming along, Watson." So in my story, Murder at the Diogenes Club, you know, it's basically, "Watson, you know my methods. What do you think?" You know, and Watson gets some of it right, but not all of it, and but actually provides the key information that helps, you know, that helps Holmes put everything together. There is a character, and Irene Adler, no, she was never Holmes's girlfriend. She was just a woman
No.
who outsmarted Holmes, and he can appreciate that. Like Robin Hood getting knocked off the log bridge by Little John, he loves a man who can beat him.
Mhm.
You know, and but one character we haven't mentioned is the one who actually is smarter than Holmes, and that's Mycroft,
Yes.
who at times is the British government. And as you might expect, Mycroft does make an appearance in Murder at the Diogenes Club.
Club, because that's his club.
Right. And well, you can call it a club. Mycroft uses it for something else. And in a part
As
of
have many British aristocrats throughout the centuries, yes.
And in a pardonable offense, Holmes hires Raffles because Mycroft needs something that, you know, needs something stolen. And Raffles, being a thief,
Is natural.
Is the natural one to get. And, you know, like I said, I like my interplay between Raffles and Holmes.
Yes, it gives basically he doesn't idolize Holmes, which sometimes one gets the feeling in some Watsons, especially with Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, where Nigel Bruce is more of a pet than a companion.
Yeah. Watson knows the good and the bad of Holmes. What was the one I think we haven't discussed? The Secret Life of Sherlock Holmes.
I love that one too.
I thought the ending was a bit weak, but other than that.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're coming up at close to the end of our time together. So I'm going to ask you all in turn to tell folks what your current releases are and where folks can find you on the web. John, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I don't have a web page, but you can find my books on Amazon. Or if you prefer, go to the publishers' websites, Bad Wolf Publishing, at Bold Venture Press, and eSpec Books. They're small presses. They could use the business. If you're looking for my two Sherlock Holmes stories, they are in The Last Redhead, a collection of my crime stories put out by Bold Venture Press. My current publication is from the Systema Paradoxa, an imprint of eSpec Books. It is When the Moon Shines, and it is a cryptid novella featuring the Maryland cryptids Snallygaster and Dwayo. And it is also a crime story set in the Prohibition era.
Okay, cool, cool. And what are your current releases and where can folks find you on the web?
You can find me on the web on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Ann Wicker, and on Instagram at ann.wicker2. And I think I mentioned the memoir that I helped Ann Moses write about Tiger Beat called Meow. And then I also have a book out that I edited. It was an idea I took to the publisher, which is unfortunately no longer with us. It was a collection of stories and essays about music in North and South Carolina called Making Notes. And so those are the things I have out right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jenny?
I have a short story writing as A.E. Stanton out in Superstitions, Tales of the Mountains. My story is Coyote and the Doorway Between the Worlds. And that's out right now. Coming up in the next couple of months will be the Derelict anthology from Zombie Needs Brains, where I'm in that as Anita Ensel with Saving Sally Ruth. And later in the year, I have another novella also writing as Anita Ensel, coming out from Baen Books, Gunfight at Europa Station, and my story in that is Showdown on Big Rock 27. And for those keeping score at home, no, Aliens Like Us is not yet done with the rewrite. It's happening, I swear.
Okay, and your website?
Oh, thank you. find me in the ether. www.ginnykoch.com. I'm on Facebook, and I have 2 Facebook fan pages, Hairspray and Rock and Roll, and author of the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series. I'm also on Twitter at Ginny Koch, and I'm on Pinterest. And you can find me pretty much everywhere.
Cool. Okay, Alexandra?
Well, my website is currently under construction. So I'm at alexandrachristian.com, but when you get there, it'll say, hold on, under construction. But that's me, but I'm all over the internet. I'm on Facebook. I'm on, my group on Facebook is called the Hells Bells, not to be confused with Hells Bells, because I think that's like a motorcycle, gang for ladies or something on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter as Alexandra Christian. I'm on TikTok as Lexi C Writes. We're gonna see what happens with that. I feel like I'm too old for TikTok, but we'll see. My niece assures me it's a great thing. And you know, just come and see me. My newest release is a contemporary romance called Falling into Rhythm, and it's the first in a small town romance series. It has a retired rock star, a really cute little boy, and a kindergarten teacher. What is not to like? Oh. And then, but my next release is going to be the second in my Dr. Watson series, and it's called let me see if I can remember the title. It's Dr. Watson and the Ladies Club Coven. So yeah, that'll be coming up in June. And yeah, that's me.
Okay, great. And Sherry, you get the last word.
Sure, I'll make it brief. You can find me at sherrythomas.com. And there's also a website for the Lady Sherlock books at ladysherlockbooks.com. And my upcoming release will be in November. That will be book 6 of the Lady Sherlock series. It will be, it's called Miss Moriarty, I presume. And there is, if you haven't tried the series and start now, you'll be finished with the first 5 books in perfect time for book 6 to come out.
Sounds like a plan to me. And thank you all for joining us here at ConTinual, the never-ending convention. And thank you out there. I hope you will check out the books of our writers here and have a very good, very Sherlockian evening. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.